Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. So today's video is going to be on a very emotionally charged topic, which is the unfortunate and tragic death of George Floyd. But unlike other videos, this video is going to specifically look into whether the charges that have been laid against Derek Chauvin are appropriate. A lot of people seem to be up in arms about the fact that Derek Chauvin was charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter as opposed to murder in the second degree. For those of you who don't know or are new to my channel, I'm a lawyer. So in this video, we will be looking into the elements of each of these crimes in order to understand why the prosecution went for the lesser charges of murder in the third degree and manslaughter in the second degree, as opposed to murder in the second degree. Before we get into the elements, I do want to mention a few evidentiary rules that the prosecution and anyone in the legal profession is bound by, because it's really important to understand these rules when discussing why the prosecution might go for a lesser charge. Firstly, the burden of proof falls onto the prosecution, which means it is their duty and their job to meet the standard of proof in order to secure a conviction. The standard of proof in criminal cases such as this one is beyond a reasonable doubt. This means that the jury or the judge must be certain that the defendant committed the crime that they have been charged with. In order for the prosecution to achieve this, each element of the crime must be satisfied. We're going to start off with murder in the third degree. As this crime took place in Minnesota, the legislation of that jurisdiction is the applicable one in this case. As per the legislation, murder in the third degree takes place when whoever, without intent to effect the death of any person, causes the death of another by perpetrating an act imminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. This essentially means that you didn't intend on causing the death of another person, but your actions were so dangerous and so reckless that only someone with a depraved mind wouldn't have anticipated that their actions would cause the death of another person. So essentially, you're out of your mind. You're not sane in the head to not anticipate that you could kill someone by engaging in certain conduct. For example, putting your knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes straight. This crime can be broken down into three main elements. Number one, without intention, which is very important because it differentiates it from murder in the second degree. Number two, causation, which is causing the death of another person. Number three, engaging in a dangerous act. All right, now in order to compare both second and third degree murder, I'm going to have to lay out the elements of second degree murder before we decide which one is the more appropriate charge. Murder in the second degree takes place when a person causes the death of a human being with intent to effect the death of that person or another, but without premeditation. So the elements of this crime are intention, causation, with no premeditation. And briefly, just for the sake of completion, so I can move on from the statutes, I'm going to lay out the elements of manslaughter in the second degree. Second degree manslaughter takes place when a person who causes the death of another by any of the following means, and the one that's relevant to this case is subsection 1, which is by the person's culpable negligence, whereby the person creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances of causing death or great bodily harm to another. So the elements of this crime are causation, causing the death of another person. The second one is negligence. And the third element is a conscious decision to engage in this conduct. Sometimes, in order to guarantee a conviction, the prosecution adds on lesser crimes or lesser charges in case the more serious charges are not satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt and the jury refuses to convict the accused of these charges. I suspect that that is why the charge of manslaughter in the second degree was added on to the complaint. It's kind of like a fallback charge or like a plan B almost. Second degree manslaughter is not very hard to prove. All the prosecution would have to prove is that Derek Chauvin was an idiot who didn't know that putting his knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes straight could potentially lead to their death. So he was negligent. And he made a conscious decision to do that despite this risk. So these elements have been satisfied and can be put to the side. Now for the crux of the matter. Sometimes a case can look like it's crystal clear to the rest of us. When you're not in the courtroom, you're not a jury, and the decision doesn't lie in your hands. But as cases have proven time and time again, the jury can be very reluctant to convict an accused if they don't have concrete, irrefutable evidence before their eyes. They're not trained like lawyers, for example, to view things from an objective place. They can be influenced by their emotions. Even though they're vetted and they're interviewed and they're selected, they're still your everyday regular person. That's the point of the jury system. They don't always convict, even though the evidence can be quite strong. It's almost like they're not comfortable unless it's completely laid out on the table for them. We have video evidence of the entire incident. That could be concrete evidence. But there's a similar case that shows how reluctant a jury can be to convict a person of, for example, second-degree murder, which has the intention element. And that case is actually so similar in the sense that it also involved a Minnesota police officer who fatally shot an Australian woman in July of 2017. His name was Mohammed Noor, so you may have already heard of him. The jury convicted him of both murder in the third degree and manslaughter in the second degree, the exact same charges that have been laid against Derek Chauvin. However, that police officer, Mohammed Noor, was also charged with second-degree murder, and the jury failed to convict him of that. Now, there was body cam footage. There was actual live footage of the incident that was available as evidence, which is, again, similar to this case. There's actual live footage. But that still wasn't enough for the jury to be convinced that Mohammed Noor intended on murdering the victim. Now, if the prosecution hadn't tacked on the lesser charges of third-degree murder and manslaughter, that officer would have walked free, and the prosecution wouldn't have been able to bring charges against him in the future for the same crime because of the legal doctrine of double jeopardy, which, if you don't know, means you cannot charge the accused of the same crime twice. If they've been acquitted, that's it. Case closed. So the main difference here between second and third degree murder is the intention element. Any lawyer or any prosecutor could argue intention because George repeatedly told Derek Chauvin that he couldn't breathe, and up until the point that he became unconscious, he made it very clear to Derek Chauvin that he was struggling to breathe. And so it's arguable that with this knowledge, despite George's protests, Derek still left his knee on his neck, which can be seen as him intending on making it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for George to breathe. I've looked at the footage and I can see the difficulty of the jury being convinced that Derek Chauvin wanted George Floyd to die. It's a much easier argument to make if the intention element was removed altogether, as is the case with murder in the third degree, and to say that Derek Chauvin was an idiot, someone with a depraved mind, a fool, for not anticipating that his actions would lead to George's death. But he didn't mean it. That wasn't his intent. He just wanted to pin him down. Now, of course, there is the entire argument of this is excessive use of force and that he wasn't even suspected of committing a violent crime. It was just a forgery of a $20 bill. So why go through that entire effort of pinning him down like that? But that's not the argument that we're having here. Here, it's a matter of, did Derek Chauvin intend on killing George Floyd? It's incredibly hard to prove. And in the law, we look at precedent. We have precedent, so that's previous cases, and we see what happened with them, how they've been decided. And I'm sure that the Minnesota police had considered the very recent case of Mohammed Noor and how he wasn't convicted of murder in the second degree. So rather than take the risk of charging Derek Chauvin with murder in the second degree and having a jury acquit him, which means he would walk free with no consequences, the prosecution, in my opinion, most likely decided to go with murder in the third degree in order to make it that much more likely for a conviction to be secured. If you remove the burden of proving intent, the jury will be much more likely to convict him because they don't have to be certain beyond a reasonable doubt that Derek Chauvin intended on killing George Floyd. All they have to be certain of is that his stupidity and his depraved mind led to George's unfortunate but accidental death. Another really famous example of where the prosecution aimed too high and failed, which basically led to the acquittal of the defendant who walked and is now a free woman, is the case of Casey Anthony. A lot of people probably know about this case where her child went missing and she went out clubbing and partying and didn't bother reporting it. The prosecution charged her with first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse. And the jury acquitted her of all 3 charges, which to me is ridiculous, right? But it just shows you how sometimes the jury, they really want it laid out on the table for them. Like, they don't want to have that, I guess, guilt. They don't want that load on their conscience. I also want to briefly mention, in terms of causation, the autopsy results apparently couldn't determine with certainty that strangulation was the cause of death. There's talk about George Floyd having pre-existing medical conditions such as asthma or a heart problem that contributed to his death. So it was like a cocktail of unfortunate circumstances that led to his ultimate death. Let's assume that that's true, which to me is preposterous, and I'm sure to anyone out there who's watched the video, to say that the cause of death wasn't strangulation is, or at least a major contributor to the cause of death, is ludicrous in my mind, because in the law we have the but-for test, right? But for Derek Chauvin's knee on George's neck for 8 minutes, George most likely, I would say certainly, would not have died that day. So there was a direct correlation, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of anyone who's analyzed this case. All right, I really hope this helps clear things out for you. The main point of this video really is to show that the prosecution isn't going for a lesser charge just to let Derek Chauvin off easy. They're going for a lesser charge to secure a conviction, to remove the risk of the jury failing to convict him because of the higher threshold and the intention element that must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. I do want to say that the fact that he was fired and charged 4 days after this happened is a step in the right direction. Yes, there is a long way to go. But now that we have first Mohamed Noor and now Derek Chauvin, these cases have set a clear precedent to every police officer out there who may think that they are invincible and above the law. What I ultimately aim to do with this video is actually put some people's minds at ease and to quell that fire and that anger over the charges. Because like I said, a lot of people seem to think that he's being let off easy. As a member of the legal profession who has been involved in cases that have failed to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and I've watched guilty people walk free because the prosecution aimed high, which they should. In a perfect world, these defendants would have been convicted, but that's just not the reality we find ourselves in right now, and the prosecution doesn't want to lose. I'm fairly certain that people will be a lot more fired up over the fact that Derek Chauvin gets to walk free if he's not found guilty of second-degree murder, instead of just going ahead and charging him with the lesser offense of third-degree murder and getting a conviction, even if it's just 25 years in prison. I actually think these cases open up an entire discussion about the jury system and making sure that the jury understand what beyond a reasonable doubt means. They don't have to be spoon-fed the evidence. You can make an inference. You don't have to have direct evidence all the time, but it's the status quo right now. Anyways, I hope I got my point across in this video. I'm in a difficult position of trying to argue why intention is hard to prove, even though I'm very angry at what happened to George Floyd. So I really do hope that I've at least delivered what I've set out to deliver, which is an explanation as to why sometimes the prosecution goes for a lesser offense if there is that difficulty of proving a more serious offense. Intention is hard. Intention is hard to prove. It always will be, because you have to get in the mind of the murderer, right? You know, you have to infer from their actions whether they intended on committing such a heinous crime. So it's always going to be one of the most difficult elements to prove. In some cases, of course, it's clear cut. Like, there's just so much evidence that points to intention. But this case isn't one of those cases. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you found it informative. I hope it can help in quelling your fire over the charges. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I do make a lot of these videos where I view high-profile cases from a legal perspective. Thanks again for watching. Stay safe, and I will catch you in a future video.